As we have seen previously, the 8th chapter of Daniel was used very practically to preserve Jerusalem. For you see, in the year 332 BC, or thereabouts, Alexander the Great was on his way conquering the entire known world. Leaving his home base in Greece, he was moving south on his way to Egypt, where he would conquer the Egyptian Empire. And he was conquering every country and destroying many cities en route from Greece down to Egypt. When he came to Jerusalem, he was once again poised and ready to annihilate it, when out came Jaddua, who at that time was the high priest in Jerusalem, and he met Alexander outside of the city and showed Alexander the 8th chapter of Daniel, written 200 years previously, and how Alexander was actually mentioned here in Daniel chapter 8. Well, Alex was blown away. He couldn't believe that he would actually be mentioned in the Bible prophetically 200 years before the event came down. And so convinced was he that this spoke of him, that he spared the city of Jerusalem. You see, in the year 551 BC, or thereabouts, Daniel had an incredible vision. Oh, you recall it, hopefully. He saw a ram. The ram had 2 horns. One rose first, but then the second horn rose higher. Daniel will later tell us in the chapter that this speaks of the Medo-Persian Empire that was to come on the scene and overthrow the Babylonians. Now, at that time, the Medo-Persians were simply Hick City. It would be like somebody telling you that in 10 years, the capital of the United States of America is going to be moved from Washington, D.C. to Rouge. You would just say, no way. That's impossible that Rouge is going to become the capital. And at this time, to suggest that the Medo-Persians were going to come on the scene, first the Medes and then the Persians, overcoming and actually growing stronger than the Medes, the second horn overcoming, incredible prophetically, but you know that it happened in history. But then the ram in Daniel's vision that spoke of the Medo-Persian Empire that would overthrow the Babylonians, the ram was attacked by a goat, and the goat had a single horn. And the goat moved with such rapidity that its feet didn't even touch the ground. And the goat, Daniel 8 goes on to tell us, is the Grecian Empire. And the goat would strike the ram, and the goat overcame the ram. And that's exactly what happened. For in the 330s, Alexander the Great took on the Medo-Persians. With 35,000 men, he took on Xerxes and the Medo-Persian Empire that had 1,000,000 men in its army. They clashed in some very strategic battles, culminating in Thermopylae, one of the great battles of history. With 35,000 men, Alexander overcame Xerxes with his 1,000,000 soldiers. And Alexander began to be known as the Great. Nothing would stop him now. And he kept on going, conquering the entire known world. The single horn, we read in Daniel chapter 8, the he-goat, verse 8 of chapter 8, waxed very great. And evidently here Jaddua stopped, because the next phrase goes on to talk about what's going to happen to Alexander. And when he was strong, the great horn on this he-goat was broken. and for it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. So, catch the scene. The he-goat with the great horn, speaking of Alexander the Great, striking the ram with 2 horns, speaking of the Medes and Persians, and overcoming the ram. Then the great horn, it says, when he was strong, was broken. At the age of 33, when Alexander was at his pinnacle, at his peak, one night there in his capital city that he had made capital of his empire in Babylon, he wept. Are there no more worlds for me to conquer? And he was empty. He shed the blood of millions to gain his own empire. But he found himself empty, and so he threw a huge drinking party, and he became drunk. And as the storm came down that night, he was walking around outside, not protected properly, in a drunken stupor. Eventually, from that, he came down with pneumonia and died at the age of 33. When he was strong, young, the most powerful person in the world, when he was strong, just like verse 8 says, he was broken. And of course, we contrast that with another who died at 33. He didn't shed the blood of millions to exalt himself. He shed his own blood that millions of us would be exalted. That is the man Christ Jesus. What a difference between Alexander and our Savior. Well, the scriptures go on to tell us that in this place of the great horn, Daniel, on the he-goat, came up 4 notable ones. Indeed, when Alexander died, his empire was split into 4 regions, and his 4 top generals took over those 4 regions. Cassander took over Europe. Lysimachus took over Asia Minor, which is the area of Turkey. Ptolemy took over Egypt. Maybe that rings a bell for you history students. And then an important one. Seleucus took over Asia and Babylon and Syria. Seleucus. Out, verse 9. Of one of them came forth a little horn. Out of the 4 comes one who is a little horn, which waxed exceedingly great toward the south and the east, and toward the pleasant land. So out of these 4, which had taken over Alexander's empire, comes one who is called the little horn. And he expands his borders. And he moves towards a place called the pleasant land. Now, the pleasant land is synonymous with Israel, the land of milk and honey. So scripturally, when you come to this terminology, the pleasant land, you're always talking about Israel. And this little horn, descending from the 4 horns that took over the 1 horn, are you following me? This one comes out of one of the empires, and he begins to move towards the pleasant land. One of the 4 generals begins to move towards the land that is called Pleasant, or a descendant of the 4 generals. And it waxed great, verse 10, even to the host of heaven. And it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped on them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away. And the place of the sanctuary was cast down, and a host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. This is wonderful, or incredible. This is exactly what happened in history. One of the four horns, the Seleucian family, that was controlling Babylon and Syria. From out of that family came a very famous, or should I say infamous, individual whom the Bible calls the little horn. He is not the same little horn that we studied in our study last week in chapter 7. That little horn we identified as being Antichrist. That little horn came out of the 10 nations, the 10 horns. If you can recall our study last week previously, chapter 7 identifies him coming out of the 10-nation confederation, the European common market, or the European community. We talked about that in depth last week. But this little horn doesn't come out of the 10-nation European Confederation, but he comes out of one of the four horns of Alexander. Now stay with me. You're saying, well, why would you have two people called the little horn? Because this little horn, who is coming out of the Seleucian family, the family of one of the four generals that took over the four parts of Alexander's empire, this little horn is a picture, a foreshadowing, an illustration of Antichrist. Even as chapter 7 identifies Antichrist as the little horn who is yet to come, this little horn has already come from our perspective. In the year 175 BC to the year 164 BC, this little horn, known as Antiochus Epiphanes, came on the scene as leader of the area of Syria and Babylon. And this guy was brutal. Antiochus Epiphanes, he called himself Theos Epiphanes. Theos, of course, means God. Epiphanes means manifested. He said, I am God manifested. Others called him Antiochus Epiphanes because he was ruling in the area of Antioch, and they gave him credit, if you would, for being powerful in that area of the world, but they wouldn't go as far as to call him Theos, that is God. They recognized his power, but others weren't willing to give him the ascription of deity. But he called himself God, Theos Epiphanes. I'm God. I am God is what he was declaring. The Jews who were aware of this madman, Antiochus Epiphanes, called him Antiochus Epimanes, a play on words which means Antiochus the insane one. They recognized that this guy was deranged, and history tells us that's true. What did he do? He began to expand the empire. Everything he set his eyes upon in that region of the world, he conquered. He had a bloodthirsty tendency and would annihilate anyone who tried to stop him in his expansionary plans. And he set his eyes towards the pleasant land, even as verse 9 tells us. And he moved. And he had a real hatred for the Jews. So much so that Antiochus Epiphanes, this little horn, came on the scene and demanded to be worshipped. He took the Jews' holy scriptures, their Torahs and all of their writings, and demanded that every one of their writings and Torahs, all their holy scrolls, would be burned. And there was an incredible book burning in the days of Antiochus. Claiming to be God, he built a statue of himself and he put it in the Jewish temple. The Jews, of course, revolted against this idea, and on that day a Holocaust began. 40,000 Jews were killed around the temple area as he set up a statue of himself and demanded to be worshipped. He went on to kill perhaps 1 million more in the coming months. He took their scrolls and their holy writings. Verse 12 tells us he cast down the truth to the ground, and that's exactly what he did. And remember, this is speaking hundreds of years before the event took place. And in fulfilling this prophecy, that's exactly what Antiochus Epiphanes did. He took the books and he cast them to the ground, and he practiced and prospered, which means he was involved in witchcraft. The guy was demonized. He was able to tell the future, and he spoke with dark sayings and difficult spiritual oratory. And there as he set this statue up and he began to speak about himself and his greatness, the Jews revolting outside, being slaughtered by his soldiers, he then had the audacity to take a pig, and he butchered the pig on the altar in the temple. And he smeared the blood of the pig all over the altar and all around the temple. And then he made the high priest and the other priests that were serving in the temple, he forced them to drink the blood of the pig. This is all information that history verifies. You can find it in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Cruel, madman, demonized incredibly. Do you see why he's called the little horn? Just like the Antichrist was called the little horn in chapter 7, because he speaks of exactly what Antichrist is going to do. We saw how Antichrist is going to come on the scene hating the Jews. We saw how Antichrist is going to set up an image of himself in the temple, even as Antiochus Epiphanes did. How Antichrist is going to cause all of the world to worship him and destroy, if he can, all religious writings, all scriptures, all Christian understandings. He's a picture. Just like in the Old Testament, the Passover lamb is a picture of Jesus Christ, the Lamb of God. So Antiochus Epiphanes, this little horn, is a picture of the little horn, the Antichrist that is yet to come. It's like Father is saying, I want you to see historically what can happen. It's only a hint, it's only a shadow, though, of what is going to happen eventually. You think Antiochus Epiphanes was bad. He is only a shadow of what is going to come. A demonized madman, a Jew hater, a gangster. In New York City last week, Peter, John, and I were traveling together, and we went into New Jersey, and we were sharing there in New Jersey with the brothers and sisters. Finished about 10 o'clock at night. And after we were done there, we went on into New York City itself, and it's incredible. I had never been inside the city, and from 10 o'clock to 3:30 in the morning, Mike Finizio, who was pastoring a church there in the inner city, gave us a tour. Showed us Harlem, and showed us Rockefeller Center and Wall Street and Madison Avenue and Riverside Church, and you name it. He just took us all over Manhattan. Gave us a great tour. And about 12:30 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning, he took us over to Little Italy. There's all these ethnic boroughs and places that are most intriguing there. And in Little Italy, we got these wonderful lasagnas that were made in, the restaurants there. It wasn't a fancy restaurant, it was authentic. I mean, everybody's yelling at each other, and here it is at 1:30 in the morning. The city it really doesn't sleep. I mean, it's crowded there at 1:30, 2, 3, just people all over, everywhere. So we were eating there, having our lasagna, and there's this Italian dessert. I can't think of the name of it, but it's filled with cream, and it's got this, it's just great. Anyway, we walked down the street after eating lasagna, and then Mike, the guy that was giving us this tour, said, "You see that building over there?" And it was just real dingy and dark, and there was a big statue of the Virgin Mary, in the window. He said, "That's John Gotti's hangout. That's where he and his fellows hang out." He said, "You can always tell where the mob is because they have a certain kind of statue of Mary that sort of like everybody knows it. It identifies where their places where they hang out." And John Gotti, perhaps the name you've forgotten about, but he was the guy that was indicted by the Justice Department, big mafia godfather leader, and got out on a technicality, I guess, about 6 months ago. So we're walking there, and Peter was about, maybe 30 yards behind us, and he was listening, and then he stopped to pick up something on the street, and all of a sudden, here we are walking down Little Italy, and everywhere, just Italians and authentic Italy, and we're across from John Gotti's hangout there, and it's weird. And Peter says, 1:30, says, "Daddy!" He yells at him 30 feet, "Daddy, what's the mob? What's the mob? Why should we worry about the mob?" I couldn't believe it, I said, "Peter, I'll tell you later." "Why? It's the mafia." "What's the mafia?" And all these guys, these Italian shopkeepers, were looking out at us, It was bizarre. But there's a huge Jewish community in New York City. In fact, 4 million. More Jews reside in New York City than reside in Israel presently. Now, in the recent elections, perhaps you've been following that. The religious groups, the 4 religious parties, are controlling the power. The Likud and the Labor, neither one of them won power in the recent election last week because the 4 religious parties, conservative Orthodox groups, we're talking black hats and curls and the whole thing, they won 18 seats in the Knesset. Unbelievable. No one predicted that. So now they are determining, they hold the balance of power, and they are determining what's going to be happening in many, many ways. Powerful group, even though they only have 18 seats, because Labor wants them and the Likud wants them. Labor is left and the Likud is right, and they're both trying to make a play to get these 18 seats to build a coalition government. So what they did is that in order to get these 18 seats, some of the Jews in New York, they flew over in jumbo jets into Israel because, you see, according to their constitution, you don't have to live in Israel to vote. You got to be there to vote, but any Jew can vote. So they flew over these jets, and they went in for the election, and they voted for the religious parties, and it was a brilliant strategy by some of the Orthodox rabbis. And now it looks like Israel is going to move even more and more into an Orthodox mentality. That means no soccer games, theaters, or airline flights on Sabbath, Shabbat. That means new moral strictness, and there's some real problems in the city of Jerusalem, in the nation, because it's moving towards an orthodoxy. Many people are worried about that. what they really need to be fearing is when Antichrist comes on the scene, because he is going to have a hatred for the Jews, just like Antiochus Epiphanes did. At first, he'll come across as a man of peace, but then he's going to cause a Holocaust that will make Adolf Hitler look like a nice neighbor, relatively speaking. By the way, tonight is Kristallnacht. And perhaps if you've been reading the papers, you know that this is a very important day in Israel. It's the 50th anniversary of the beginning of the Holocaust in the days of Adolf Hitler. So Jews worldwide will light candles tonight to commemorate Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, the beginning of the darkest time in modern history, the Holocaust. 50 years ago, mobs led by Nazi stormtroopers attacked Jews in Germany and Austria, killing 100. That has recently been debated. They say now it was 10 times that number on that first night of the Holocaust. Arresting 20,000, the first 20,000 to be marked with a yellow star and hauled off into concentration camps, and destroying 200 synagogues. That number is also conservative according to many. Leaving a trail of broken lives and broken glass. That's why it's called the Night of the Broken Glass. Tonight's ceremonies are to remind the world that the world simply stood silently by. With support from 50 governors, the commemoration also signals the struggle against continual Jewish persecution. Rabbi Berkowitz, one of the temples there in Falls Church, Virginia, that was smeared with anti-Semitic slogans and blood and manure in October, said, "We have to be a vigilant people, because people who forget history are bound to repeat it. I find it distressing that there are still signs of prejudice and intolerance in this free world." This year, there have been 700 acts of anti-Semitic vandalism in the USA alone. 700 attacks against the Jews. In 87, there were 690. In 86, 590. And we see a steady increase each year, about 100 more attacks. This year's violence in Dallas, October, a temple and meeting hall had windows shot out and were painted with red swastikas. In September, in New York, 15 plaques were stolen from Jewish graves, a day after 6 scrolls were destroyed by arsons and burned. Many acts are committed by young neo-Nazi skinhead groups who worship Hitler. Last year on Kristallnacht in Chicago, they attacked 11 Jewish establishments. This is the hate, says Michael COURSON, Jewish Community Relations Council, that generated the Holocaust. What I'm saying by this, and what they're saying in this, is the hatred for the Jews is not over. It goes on and on and on. And there's really no logical explanation. From the days of Pharaoh in the Old Testament to Haman in the days of Esther, who wanted to hang all the Jews from the gallows, to the days of Herod in the New Testament, to the days of Hitler, there has always been this anti-Semitic tendency in the human race. A hatred for the Jews that's inexplicable unless you read your Bible. Then you know. You know why Antiochus Epiphanes and others like him take on with a vengeance the Jewish people. Satan is inspiring it, folks. Satan inspires it. Why? Satan wants to destroy the Jews. Because Satan knew that from the Jews Messiah would come, and he attempted to destroy the Jewish nation before Jesus Christ could be birthed. But he failed. In fact, everything he did backfired. Oh, Jewish history is fascinating. When Jesus was born, and as Jesus grew, Satan continued his attacks on the Jews. Why? He failed the first time, but he knows, I'm going to stop his second coming. And he inspired men like Hitler to come on the scene, to wipe out the Jews as his final solution. Because Messiah couldn't come back if there was no Jewish nation. But it backfired. When Adolf Hitler attempted to wipe out the entire race after gassing 6 million, and I hope each one of you will watch a documentary tonight, perhaps on TV, later on it'll be on a PBS, or do some reading at some point in your life about this Holocaust and what really took place. You will see the tenacity of Satan inspiring Hitler as he inspired Haman and Antiochus Epiphanes and Pharaoh and Herod, and on the list goes, and the skinheads of today inspired by Satan. But it didn't work. Hitler failed, and all it did was create a sentiment in the world to say, give the Jews a homeland. When Hitler went down, the nation of Israel was rebirthed. In a sense, you got to feel sorry for the enemy, Satan. Not really, but everything he does always backfires. Totally. And the nation of Israel was birthed. It would have never been had it not been for the Holocaust. The world doesn't favor the Jews. But at that time, there was a pitying, a sorrowing, a guiltiness, because even in our country, folks, we knew what was happening in the concentration camps. We have record after record after record of Jewish emissaries coming over, showing us photos and documents that there was concentration camps where the gassing of Jews by the tens of thousands was going on, and they begged our leaders to bomb those concentration camps and destroy the gassing. And I'm sorry to say that we said we couldn't fit it in our military strategy and plans. And we waited and waited. And perhaps 2 million Jews of the 6 million died needlessly because we had the information the Allies knew. You say, John, where do you get this documentation? Go to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. Not with any bitterness or hostility, but just with integrity and openness. They display the documents and all of the correspondence that went on between Jews who were begging our highest leaders, including our president, saying, please bomb the concentration camps, bomb Auschwitz. There's a Holocaust going on there. And we said, no. We can't spare the planes at this point, and they continue to be gassed. We know that. Oh, I'm not saying the American public, but historians understand that. And everyone felt guilty at the end of World War II, and so suddenly they said, let's carve out a little piece of ground for the Jews. It was to ease our conscience as much as anything. All part of God's plan. The nation was born again. May 14th, 1948. Suddenly, after almost 2,000 years without a homeland, Israel is reborn exactly as the Bible prophesied. But her troubles aren't over. That's what this is saying. Chapter 7, we saw last week, little horn is coming. Chapter 8 tells us a little horn already came, giving us a sneak preview of coming tragedies. Antiochus Epiphanes, a madman, a butcher. I guess I'm concerned as a congregation, as students of the Scripture that we are, that these things simply become academic to us. Oh, so he killed 100,000 or 1 million. So he made the priests drink blood and desecrated the temple. That was so long ago. I think personally that this is part of the problem with the violence that's on TV and in the movies. We have grown so accustomed to bloodletting that it no longer impacts us. Please keep in mind, this wasn't that long ago. You say, didn't you say it was 174 BC? Doesn't that make it 2,000 years ago approximately? How many of you people know that time goes by quickly? This wasn't that long ago. And it's going to be happening again. Antiochus Epiphanes. A little horn. Foreshadowing another little horn that's coming. Now verse 13. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice, the transgression of desolation, or the abomination of desolation, as Jesus called it in Matthew 24? To give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. And he said to me, Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. What is this 2,300 days? I need to insert this because there is a teaching that came by a Baptist preacher named William Miller. He was discipling a lady named Ellen G. White, who became a writer and sort of a founder, along with Miller, of what are called the Seventh-day Adventists today. William Miller looked at this scripture, verses 13 and 14, and he determined that each one of these days stood for a year. He had no grounds to do that. He was a sincere man, from what I understand, but he was sincerely wrong in his interpretation. And he went on to say, according to this, and he had some calculations that he worked out, and it was quite an esoteric, involved computation. But he said, according to this proves absolutely, if you take each one of these days as being a year, that Jesus Christ would come back in 1843. And that's when he was teaching. And he set a date. And all of his followers, along with Ellen G. White, they put on white robes, and you know the story. They went up to the side of a mountain, 7,000, 8,000 in number, on that day, and they waited. And they waited. And they waited. And they waited. Nothing happened. So eventually they came back down. And they reworked their calculations, and then William Miller and Ellen G. White said, well, what really happened was it took place in the heavenlies. There was a cleansing that took place spiritually. It didn't happen that Jesus came for us physically, but it was a thing that took place spiritually, and they kind of sidestepped the issue. But the movement that came out of that misinterpretation was Adventism. And they're still going today, and it's a part of their history that they don't like to talk about necessarily. But then again, a lot of believers bought into this latest calculation by what's-his-face. 88 reasons why Jesus Christ will come back in 88. I will now give you one reason why he didn't. One reason why he didn't come back. Jesus said, no man knows the day or the hour. Period. If anybody else comes on the scene telling you the day and the hour, you can just sort of check it off. Now the times and seasons we do know. Paul makes that exceedingly clear. But the day and the hour, when anybody starts saying, this is the day, and this is the hour, I don't care how they try and get around it, you just mark it off, trash it. Let me just insert this about that too. You know what the Bible is? It was written for the guy on the street, not for the scholar in some ivory tower who makes calculations and computations that no one can understand. Just take it for what it means. It's very simple. And when Jesus said, no man knows the day or the hour, that's exactly what he meant. No man knows the day or the hour. And inevitably, people come on the scene and say, well, that's not really what he meant. And they quote some linguistical expert, and it's... The Bible was written for the guy on the street. That's why in the New Testament, the Greek that was used was a type of Greek called Koine Greek. It means street level, slang. That's what it is. There was classical Greek that was written for scholars and intellectuals. There was Koine Greek, which was like rapping, street level stuff. And guess what the Holy Spirit did? He inspired the writers of the New Testament to use Koine, street level, because he wanted people to understand it simply. So, Miller took this, and he was in a real error as he set a day, an exact time when the Lord would come back. And they followed him, and they were disappointed. They were wrong. What does this mean then? All you have to do is go back and look at history. September 6th, 171 BC, when Antiochus Epiphanes began his reign in the pleasant land, he went to the priests and began to try and get them to blaspheme and drink the blood of pigs. There was a man, though, in the small little village of Modin, 17 miles northwest of Jerusalem. Mattathias was his name. And he refused to give in to the pressures of Antiochus and his soldiers. He said, "We will never defile ourselves." Like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of old, he told those soldiers, "Bug off. We're not going to give in to your pressures." And they killed him. But he had 5 sons. And these 5 sons, led by one son named Judas Maccabeus. These 5 sons were so incensed about what happened at that time that they became an army fighting against Antiochus Epiphanes. 5 men, 5 brothers, said, we're going to wage war against this madman, Epimanes, the crazy one. And with guerrilla tactics that made the Viet Cong look like rookies, these guys began attacking Antiochus and his soldiers, and soon others came around them and began to join with them. And the Maccabean revolt took place. September 6th, 171 BC. And finally, December 25th, 165 BC, they drove Antiochus and his boys out of the land. They won a strategic battle there in Jerusalem, and Antiochus and his boys ran for their lives. The Maccabeans chased them away, overcoming great odds. Not dissimilar to what happened in Vietnam, or perhaps with the Afghanistan Mujahideen driving out the Russians. Similar. They drove them out. And they went in the temple, and they cleaned out the blood that was shed there, the pig blood that was smeared around, and they cleaned out the temple, and they relit the candles. And the people of Jerusalem were celebrating when suddenly somebody said, wait, we've got a problem. Judas, Maccabean brothers, listen, we've got a problem. You've lit the candles, but there's only enough light for 1 day. And according to our laws, it takes 8 days to make holy oil to be used for these holy candles. So the lights that you have lit, rededicating the temple, we're going to be out of oil. The temple will go dark. This is not good. It's not right in the sight of God. It's a bad sign. And the Maccabeans prayed, Lord, you have delivered us from the hands of Antiochus, the madman. Lord, allow the oil to go on miraculously until the 8 days pass when the new batch will be ready. And the Lord did just that. Called the Feast of Dedication, John chapter 10. Now we call it the Feast of Lights or Hanukkah. When God miraculously allowed the oil to last. No, it's not 8 days. Tammy, help me out. Is it 8 days? 8 days, right. The feast Hanukkah, for those that celebrate Hanukkah, of course, at our Christmas season, the Jews celebrate Hanukkah, which is the commemoration of the Maccabees overthrowing Antiochus. And the light going on miraculously. So they light a candle each night for the 8 days of Hanukkah, symbolizing the miracle. Now, from September 6th, 171 BC, to December 25th, 165 BC, when they relit the lights and rededicated the temple, is exactly 2,300 days to the day. Exactly. Even as the prophet spoke, verses 13 and 14, how long will this be, the desolation of Antiochus? And the Lord said, 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. I like it. Speaking absolutely accurately. Verse 15. And it came to pass when I, even I, Daniel, had seen the vision and sought for the meaning, then behold, there stood before me as the appearance of a man. And I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and said, Gabriel, make this man to understand the vision. So he came near where I was standing, and when he came, I was afraid. And I fell on my face, but he said to me, understand, son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. In other words, the vision that you're seeing about the ram with 2 horns, and the goat with a single horn, and 4 horns, and then a little horn coming out, and all of this happening is not just for the time of Antiochus, but it's what we call a double fulfillment in prophecy. That means it speaks also not just of one event, but a fuller event later on at the time of the end. Antiochus is only a shadow of Antichrist. For the end of time it shall be. Now, verse 18, as he was speaking, I fell into a deep sleep. That doesn't mean he was bored. It means he freaked out and fainted. And I fell into a deep sleep on my face toward the ground. But he touched me and he set me aright. And he said, behold, I will make thee to know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed the end shall be. Verse 20, the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and the rough goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king, that is Alexander. By the way, the goat was known as the official symbol of the Grecian Empire. In fact, the word Aegean, you know how the Aegean Sea surrounds Greece? It means Sea of the Goat. Alexander named his one son August, which means son of the goat. So if you're looking for a name, any of you parents, and you want to name your child after dad, that might be a name to consider. August, son of the goat. But Alexander recognized that he was the goat. His son was named son of the goat. Now, verse 22, that being broken, whereas 4 stood up for it, are 4 kingdoms which shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. They won't be powerful like Alexander. Verse 23, and in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. This is both Antiochus, more importantly, Antichrist. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He'll be mighty in power, but it won't be his own power. There's an article in the paper speaking of power. in Ogden, Utah. It says snake swallower irks Humane Society. A snake swallowing act has come under fire from the Utah Humane Society, which says it may ask the legislation to outlaw the practice. Ron Stewart's reptile gobbling performance came 5 months ago during the "What's the craziest thing you would do for a motorcycle" contest. The competition was sponsored by a radio station. In its fall newsletter, the society denounced Stewart's act, which placed third in the contest, swallowing a large snake. The contest was won by 21-year-old Janice Merrill of Ogden, who covered herself in liquid cow manure and rolled herself in cornflakes. If they want to make idiots of themselves, that's their business, said Catherine Brandt, the Humane Society's director. But when it involves animals who can't defend themselves, that's when we step in. The Animal Group Protection reported that the snake was eaten alive, but Stewart said the reptile was actually killed a second before he ate it. So here's a guy. What's the craziest thing you would do for a motorcycle contest? Grabbing a big snake, and somehow as he puts it in his mouth, he's able to kill it and swallow it so people think he's swallowing a live snake. But it's trickery. Antichrist will come on the scene. And he will appear to be powerful, but really, it's not his power. He'll do things that are incredible. Revelation tells us when we get there that it will appear as though he was actually assassinated and coming back to the dead. Is it so? No. It's trickery. Even as this fella killed the snake somehow cleverly and then swallowed him, so the Antichrist will perform a host of signs and wonders, and they will be impressive, no doubt, but it's not his own power. It's trickery, it's counterfeit, it's Satan himself demonizing Antichrist. When he comes on the scene, this one whom we spoke of last week, man, he's going to be impressive. But it's not his power. Whose power is it? Revelation 17 tells us, I believe, when we get there, that it's the same demon that inhabited Caesar Nero, the one that took off his clothes and shrieked nakedly as he rode in his chariot through his gardens, while thousands of Christians were burned alive as human candles, covered with wax and being ignited in the night. That same demon that influenced Caesar Nero is going to come upon Antichrist, going to indwell Antichrist. He is going to be demonized. And I suggest to you the possibility that it is that same demon that was in Antiochus Epiphanes, later on seen in Caesar Nero, perhaps reappearing in Adolf Hitler, for sure coming into the Antichrist. A clever, powerful, hating demon spirit. He'll be powerful, but not by his own power, verse 24 says, and he shall destroy wonderfully, that means awesomely, and shall prosper and practice, that is witchcraft, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft, again a reference to witchcraft, to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart. He'll claim to be God, even as Antiochus Epiphanes did, even as Satan did in Isaiah 14, when he was in heaven at the right hand of God as a worship leader called Lucifer. Pride filled his heart. He said, I will be like God. And pride caused Satan to fall, and that same pride will manifest itself in Antichrist, as it did in Antiochus Epiphanes, who claimed to be God manifested. This world leader will come on the scene. At first, it says, and by peace he shall destroy many. He'll come as a man of peace, solving the problems in the Middle East, solving the economic tensions in the world, the debt problems, the deficit troubles. He'll solve all situations. He'll be hailed as a man of peace. But then he will show his true colors in the middle of the tribulation period, in the middle of that 7-year period, 3.5 years after he comes into power. Blood is going to start to flow, and heads are going to start to roll. Anyone who does not worship him, when Antichrist, according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, sets up his image in the temple and demands to be worshipped, anyone who doesn't will be jeopardizing their own life. And he shall also, verse 25, stand up against the Prince of Princes. He'll fight against Jesus Christ himself, but he shall be broken without hand. I like that. At the Battle of Armageddon, Antichrist will have the audacity to war against the coming Christ, but he'll be broken without hand. That means apart from human help. You know, the Lord doesn't need our help. He's going to take care of the enemy single-handedly. And Antichrist will be defeated and cast into the abuso, the pit. Well, verse 26. And the vision of the evening and the morning which was told is true. It is. Look back in history. You'll see this story unfolding. Get your Britannica out. Do some reading. It is true. And the prophetic part that has not yet been fulfilled concerning Antichrist is equally certain. Wherefore, shut thou up. That's not a word of instruction for me. Not yet. Shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for many days. Daniel, fold it up. I've given you this vision of a little horn coming, and what he speaks of concerning the end times eventually. Shut it up, Daniel. Verse 27, and I, Daniel, perhaps you can relate to this, fainted. And I was sick certain days. Afterward I rose up and did the king's business. And I was astonished at the vision, but none understood it. Listen carefully. Daniel said, heavy. I don't get it. I feel sick over it. I'm wiped out concerning it. The vision was so real to him. He knew that this little horn coming, devastating, the end times being spoken of, awful, and he was sick over it. He didn't understand it. Now I say this to us tonight. Maybe you can relate to Daniel. You say, I don't get it, John. Little horns and 10 toes and brass bellies. I'm completely confused in this whole study. I don't get it. I know that many of you don't. I know that these prophecies of Daniel that are so incredible are not easy to understand. I understand that. Daniel didn't even get it. So don't feel bad. Don't feel like, you're a spiritual nerd if you don't have down the prophecies. Maybe a bunch of you are saying, I don't get it. But yet the impact of it will affect you and me and all that are open to his Spirit tonight. I know that too. We've got to go about the king's business, just like Daniel did. We say, okay, I don't get all these prophecies, but I get the big picture. I have kind of the general feeling, Lord, that things are coming down. That this world is not getting better and brighter each and every day, but we're headed towards some heavy times. Where my mom and dad, if they're not saved, are going to be experiencing some tensions that are unbelievable. My son or my daughter, who's not a Christian, is going to be going through a time that is indescribable. My best friend at work, that guy is going to go through hell on earth when Antichrist appears, and that's going to be soon. And that much I do understand. I've got to be going about the King's business. This is not a game we're playing. That's the message here. Whether you can identify all the 10 toes or not is not the point. God is saying in this book, wake up. We're not playing a game here. We're talking about eternal destiny, about friends and family going through the tribulation unnecessarily, about suffering, about persecution, and for many, eternal damnation. May God help me and you to be sick about that and to faint, Lord. This is real, isn't it, Lord? It's true and certain. That's why you've recorded all this, to show us that your plan is absolutely certain. And why are we sitting here tonight? To be instructed, to be challenged, to be once again motivated, to be yet again reminded that we are in an important place as ambassadors of Jesus Christ. We've got to go about the King's business. We can't just cruise through Christianity, going to a Bible study occasionally, praying sporadically, and hoping that somehow things are just going to kind of work out if I can turn off my VCR for a while. I hope my boy, who's 19 years old, doesn't end up in hell. You better do more than hope. You better get about the King's business. I better get about the King's business. This is real stuff. Prayer meetings should be packed out. Bible studies should be attended religiously. We should be getting fired up and inspired and trained. Notes should be taken. Scriptures should be studied. Tapes should be gone over again. We should become an army in the Applegate, fanning from this place and saying, we're about our King's business. The days of slumbering sainthood are over. I really believe that. Convenient Christianity where we just say, well, I don't need to learn the prophecies. I don't need to know the Bible. I'll pray if it works into my schedule. I won't write my parents or my family. I won't witness to my neighbor. It's just not important. Yes, it is. Can I challenge you to go about the King's business? And I rose up and did the King's business. May that be true of us.